Please let people in and we start the transmission.
Olá, boa tarde,
Good
pessoal.
afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone who is here with us in our Zoom and who is watching through our channels. We have a YouTube channel and a Facebook channel. We have these both channels transmitting in different languages. We have one in Portuguese and one in English. Please access the one that is more comfortable for you.
A gente tem hoje a
Today we
oportunidade
have the
de
opportunity
escutar
to
grande
listen
escritor
to
que
a
Mário nos
very
apresentou
important
como
writer that
profeta.
Mario has
A
introduced
gente
to us
tem
as a prophet.
vai escutar por
We are
quê?
going
Porque
to
o Mário
listen why Mario
considera esse
considers this
adjetivo para Richard
adjective
Landes a
for Richard
partir do que
Landes, the
escreveu no seu
prophet, based on
livro
what he
O
wrote
Mundo
in
Inteiro
his
Pode
book,
Estar
Can
Errado?
the Whole
É
World Be
isso
Wrong?
mesmo. É possível que todo mundo
Is it
esteja errado.
possible that everyone
E a
is wrong?
gente ter a oportunidade de escutar
And here we have
diretamente
the
o
opportunity to
autor.
listen the
Logo mais a
author
gente espera ter o
himself
livro
comment on
dele
the
já
book,
também o
and we
lançamento em
hope the book
português.
will be
Mas
released
enquanto
in
isso a gente tem a
Portuguese soon.
oportunidade de
But
escutar em primeira
while we
mão
wait,
da
we will
parte
have the
dele
chance of listening to
os
the
seus
author
pensamentos,
himself,
especialmente num
sharing
momento
his
tão
thoughts, especially
delicado
in
como o que a gente está
such
vivendo,
delicate
tão sui
times as we
generis,
are
e é tão
going
difícil
through.
fazer análise
It's very hard to
com
analyze
o curso da história em movimento.
with the history as it happens, right?
Contexto, a gente
So in
poder
this
contar
context,
com
it's
especialistas
wonderful
que
to be
venham
able to
nos
count on
trazer seus
specialists
insights, é
that come
sempre
to
uma
bring us their
oportunidade. Bom,
insights.
antes de passar a palavra
So
para o
before I pass the
Mário
floor to
Fleck, que
Mario
é
Fleck,
o idealizador da
Mario Fleck
Academia
is
Judaica e o
the
motor de
person who
todo
idealized the Jewish
desse
Academy of
programa,
Brazil, and he
eu queria
created the
também
program
aproveitar
as well.
esses
I
minutinhos
would
iniciais
like
para
to take these
compartilhar com
initial
as pessoas que
first
nos
few minutes
escutam a
to share
respeito
with
de em que
everyone that's
estágio
listening
nós estamos com a Academia
to us
Judaica
where
hoje.
we are as
Nós
Academia
acabamos de
Judaica or
lançar
Jewish
plano
Academy.
de
We have
assinaturas.
just
Nós estamos
started
numa
a
nova
subscription
identidade
with
visual
membership, and
e
we
uma
have a
nova
new
plataforma
visual
de streaming
identity as
também,
well
onde
as a
todos os
new
cursos da
streaming
nossa prateleira,
platform
mais de
where
70
all our
cursos,
courses, more than
mais de
70
300
courses,
aulas, ou
more than
seja,
300
também a gente
classes
tem
already are featured.
materiais
We have
editados de curta
several
duração,
material,
também
short
o
form
JFlix, que
material,
é como um
and what we
Netflix
call
judaico,
JFlix,
com
which is like
conteúdo
a Jewish
judaico, ou seja, tudo
Netflix
isso está
with
disponível na
content
plataforma com
about
um único clique.
Judaism.
Já não
Everything
precisa
is
mais, não
available
tem
at the
mais a
platform of
necessidade de se
one single
inscrever
click.
em cada
You don't
curso
have to
individualmente, só
register in
fazendo uma
each
assinatura é
course.
possível
You
ter
can
acesso a
just become
todo o
a
conteúdo
member and have
de uma só
access
vez.
to the whole
Aí na
content
tela
at
vocês têm
once. And
o
in the
QR Code que
screen,
vocês
as you can
podem
see, you have
utilizar
a
para
QR code.
saber
You can
mais.
use this
E eu
QR code to
convido a
learn more
vocês que,
about
se derem
our
a
platform
oportunidade
and the
de ir
membership
lá,
program.
olhar,
I
conhecer
I would like
e
everyone
depois
to
escolher se
go
vocês querem
visit
continuar. Eu tenho
and
certeza
choose
que
whether
vocês
you
vão
want
encontrar
to
lá um
participate. I'm
material
sure
muito
that you
rico,
will find
selecionado,
very
de
rich and
toda,
selected
do mundo
material
inteiro, que a gente
from
também
all
está tendo
over
essa
the world.
curadoria do conteúdo,
We have
vem
been
trazendo para dentro
curating
da
this
Academia Judaica
material and
diferentes
bringing it
perspectivas,
to the Jewish
diferentes
Academy,
olhares sobre
interacting different
temas que
perspectives
nos
and
afetam
over topics
como
that
judias e como
affect
judeus,
us as
e eu
Jewish
acredito
people.
que é uma oportunidade a gente poder ter uma
And I think
plataforma
it's
em
a wonderful
português e a
opportunity
gente
to have this
ter, como
platform
por
in
exemplo agora
Portuguese,
conosco o
having
Richard Landes
for
falando
example,
em
here with
inglês, e
us,
a gente
Richard
vai
Landis.
ter
He will
também na
speak in English,
plataforma essa
but
entrevista
we
em
have the
português.
translation, and
Então
we
eu
will have
passo a bola para o
the interview
Mário
in
para que
Portuguese available
possa
at our streaming
seguir
platform
adiante
as
com a
well.
condução
Mario, now I pass the
para a gente
floor to
aproveitar o
you
tempo do
so
Richard.
you
Muito
can
obrigada.
conduct the
Obrigado,
session.
Kelita.
Thank you, Kelita.
Before I read the curriculum of Professor Richard Landis, I want to share with you how I met him and how this connection started. So first of all, I got across some article about his book. The name of the book is "Can the Whole World Be Wrong?" And then I was fascinated by the summary. I bought the book. I couldn't leave the book alone until I finished it. And immediately after I finished the book, I tried to find where is this guy. You know, I have to find him somewhere in the world, and I succeeded doing that. After that, we with a group of friends here of our Academy of Jewish Studies, we initiated the process of translating the book, which is not a small one, and is getting ready. We hope that at the beginning of the year, the Portuguese version of the book will be ready to be distributed in Brazil. But Professor Richard Landis was at the Department of History at the Boston University. He was director of the Center for Millennial Studies. He was also senior fellow at the Bar-Ilan University, and he was a specialist in millennial thinking in the Middle Ages. He has many books. The other book besides this one that we are going to talk today is called Celebrating Orientalism. And I think that this is a very important, interesting book because it criticizes a very famous author from the Arab world called Edward Said. So I recommend this for you. But even before we start with some questions here, I want to read from the introduction of the book a small paragraph that I think that makes the frame of all the discussion that we are going to have, and I hope you all enjoy very much like I did. And this is a part of the introduction where Richard, the author here with us, makes an advice for the readers of the book. He says exactly like this: this book is something of a take it or leave it. You are free to walk away from this analysis and write it off as the rantings of an Israel firster, a Zionist propagandist. And from some points of view, that's an obvious and easy way to deal with my argument. Easy, that is, as long as you are right, and you are right that I am wrong. On the other hand, if I am right, then you, liberal, progressive, democratic, lover of human dignity and freedom, engage in very high risk behavior by ignoring what I have to say. And he said some phrases down that if he is right, we are in deep trouble. And this was written before October 7th. That's why I call Richard a prophet. So Richard, we're very happy to have you here. We are happy to have your book translated. I think it's a mandatory reading in the world that you are living. And I cannot imagine if you would really suppose that we would be living in the times that you are living when you wrote the book. But before we start, I wanted you to complement my introduction about yourself if I missed something, and also to tell us about your activities, some more about your background, and what are you doing today?
Well, I was trained as a medievalist, and I worked on apocalyptic, millennial, messianic movements in the Middle Ages, mostly Christian. And then got involved in the 1990s in founding a center at Boston University called Center for Millennial Studies, for the study of millennialism, which the definition of millennialism is the belief that at some point in the future, there will be heaven on earth, which is the title of my book, Heaven on Earth, the Varieties of the Millennial Experience. So this belief that at some point the world will sort of leave behind its warlike oppression, and the lion will lie down with the lamb, and the lamb will get up the next day. That vision of a perfected world has both religious and secular forms. So both Nazism and communism get a chapter in my book because both of them are in fact movements that, even though they claim to be secular, are believe that they are bringing the perfected society to Earth. And one of the groups that I was studying at that time was global jihad. And that has a very distinct apocalyptic dimension, particularly in the areas around Israel and Jordan, Egypt, Palestinian areas, Lebanon. All of these places are publishing apocalyptic works from, among others, Hamas ideologues. So Hamas is by my definition an apocalyptic millennial movement, and already in the 1990s, I realized that they were a very powerful force. And if you tried to talk to people about it, and you said, well, they believe that they're going to conquer the world and there will be a global caliphate, the response of Westerners was, well, that's ridiculous. And my response to them was, look, it may be ridiculous that they're going to succeed, but on the way to failure, they can do a lot of damage. I mean, if you think of the Nazis, they only had 12 years of their tausendjährige Reich, but in those 12 years, they managed to kill and to get killed, tens of millions of people. The Soviets even more, and the Maoists even more. So, these movements, particularly what I call active cataclysmic movements, that is, movements that believe that massive destruction has to take place before to sort of clear the way for the kingdom to descend, and that they are the actors. They're the ones who are called upon to bring about this destruction. These are movements of mega death, and one of them I have in my book is called the Taiping, which means heaven on earth, in China in the mid-19th century, and estimates are that they killed somewhere, but well, they did kill, but the total of deaths as a result of 14 years of millennial war from 1850 to 1864 was 20 to 35 million people. And that's before dynamite and bombs and so on. So these are incredibly destructive movements, and I tried to draw people's attention to it with no success whatsoever. People better than me and more knowledgeable on the sources than me also failed. So when at the beginning of the 21st century in 2000, when the Intifada, I call it the Oslo Jihad, began, and then a year later when bin Laden struck America, when you had this open war of jihad on democracy, a mentality developed in the West, which I call Y2K mind, Y2K being year 2000, which said when jihadis attack a democracy, blame the democracy. So when they attacked Israel, the response of certainly the progressive left in the West, was to blame Israel. And then when they attacked America, again, the response of the left was to blame America. And this is deeply ingrained in our thinking, partly because of a sort of phobia of being accused of Islamophobia. So anybody who says that jihad is integral to Islam and there's a direct link between Islamic ideology and global jihad is immediately dismissed as an Islamophobe. And I had trouble publishing the book as a result. I mean, I went to a very favorable book agent who really wanted to do me a favor. And as soon as she saw the book, she said, I can't do this.
Yeah. Richard, and by the way, I am in Tel Aviv. I forgot to say at the beginning, I am in Tel Aviv. And if there is an alarm here, Kelita, you assume the driving seat, okay? But I hope it doesn't. Yesterday we had one here, but it was a false alarm. Anyway, I'm very close to the place I would have to go in case of need. But Richard, so when did you write the book? I want you to make a connection between when you wrote the book and the days we are living, because really you kind of anticipated, and you call in the book the risk of the stupidity of the West. That what we saw since October 8th, the day after the pogrom here in Israel, was really the stupidity of the West being showing in our faces big time. And this is what you wrote precisely in the book. Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, actually, I started the book in 2008, and unfortunately, it went through 2 or 3 different versions, and I was working on other stuff. I was teaching, so it took me way too long to come out with that. I was working on it for over a decade, and that's somewhat inexcusable. But while I was working on the book, the working title was "They're So Smart Because We're So Stupid: A Medievalist Guide to the 21st Century." And part of the book is trying to explain to Westerners that they grow up in democracies with a set of attitudes which are actually quite new, modern. They are not shared by the vast majority of civilizations and cultures around the world. In fact, are the enemies of democracy, the jihadis, or I call them caliphators, because it's not just people who are fighting a military fight, but also a cognitive war against the West. These caliphators live in a world where medieval values of honor and shame, of the legitimacy of killing somebody for the sake of your honor, of shedding blood for the sake of honor, are dominant. And Westerners who live in a society in which that kind of attitude has been sort of banned as immature and inappropriate and even criminal. I believe duels are not legal in most Western countries. Have difficulty understanding this. And, I also always worked with my students in medieval history, and said, look, you have to understand their mentality. It's not your mentality. Now it becomes really serious when you get Westerners looking at the Arab-Israeli conflict, and instead of realizing that the Palestinian leadership, I don't know about the Palestinian people, but the Palestinian leadership it lives in a world in which shedding Israeli blood for the sake of Arab honor is not just important, it's an imperative. The very existence of the state of Israel is a blasphemy to a form of Islam that says unless Islam dominates, the validity of its beliefs is in question. So the presence of an autonomous infidel state in the heart of what should be Dar al-Islam, the realm of Islam, of submission, is absolutely unacceptable. And therefore, a war of extermination is perfectly legitimate. And that's what Hamas is about. That's what Islamic Jihad is about. And in its own secular way, that's what the Palestinian PLO and the Palestinian Authority are about. And we just don't understand that. So I wrote the book in a sense to say, wake up. You're not seeing, you're projecting your mentality. You're West-splaining the problem. So in West-splaining terms, the poor Palestinians are looking for dignity and human rights and freedom, and the mean Israelis are refusing it to them. Whereas in reality, the medieval Palestinian leadership is seeking to destroy a free people, and they're certainly not going to bring freedom to their own people. I don't know if you saw it, but today the Israelis finally released a bunch of tapes that they captured in Gaza of Hamas operatives, hundreds of hours of tapes of Hamas operatives torturing Palestinian civilians, Gazans. There's absolutely no sign any time in the history of the Palestinian leadership of any democratic tendencies, of any concern for the human rights of their people. It's all language that they use to dupe Westerners, and Westerners seem to be almost dedicated to being duped.
Richard, in this scenario, two opposite views. One is that if you take the Saudi Arabia somehow, my interpretation, somehow in the last 20 years made some homework in terms of de-radicalization, changing the situation in the madrasas, in the mosques, and things like that. So could we believe that this will be the part of Islam that could control the jihadists and manage to have a better situation here in the Middle East?
Well, we certainly would like to believe that, and I think it's possible, although I think it's dangerous to immediately jump to the conclusion that the Saudis are now on our side or on the side of, Western democratic civilization. The good signs are that, for example, under its current ruler, Saudi Arabia has allowed women to enter the public sphere. And that's a huge difference. The only women who are allowed into the public sphere in Palestinian territories, particularly Hamas territories, are women who are willing to be spokesmen for the cause. And same is true of Afghanistan and Iran and so on, where women have to wear, and now I hear Libya is about to pass a law that women have to wear the hijab and so on. So in some senses, you're right. And in some senses, the Abraham Accords is the most promising thing coming out of the Middle East, which should get a shot in the arm with the new Trump administration, although, I don't know, Trump is not exactly your most consistent and reliable figure. But the idea that the Saudis and other Arab countries have finally come to the conclusion that working with Israel is a whole lot more productive and good for their people than constantly scapegoating Israel and attacking her and sacrificing the well-being of their own people to this, I would call it insane war, but from their point of view, it's not insane. Is the way out. And if the Palestinians were to change their leadership and get a leadership that was more in line with the Abraham Accords, then I'm pretty sure they would have autonomy at least, and possibly a state, if they were to do that. But in order to do that, I think, I blame a great deal. I blame the Western progressive camp. I think the Western progressive camp has literally done everything to encourage Palestinian irredentism. And instead of challenging the Palestinians and saying, you're inflicting your own disasters on yourself, which is certainly true of the Nakba. The Nakba was a self-inflicted catastrophe. And the first people in the Arab world to talk about the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948, blamed the Arab elite for declaring a war that they proceeded to lose. And so if the left were to actually work for civil society in the Arab world and help them develop the kinds of NGOs that help civil society, rather than help them build NGOs that demonize Israel and keep them stuck in their self-destructive behavior, I think we'd have a much better chance of the kind of changes that need to happen in the Palestinian political culture than we do now. Right now, the West is just, I call it own goal diplomacy and own goal journalism. I mean, our journalists are literally running Palestinian propaganda as news. So they're running the enemy's propaganda, war propaganda, as news to their Western audiences. Again, as I say, as I tried to imply in the original chapter of my book, you can't get stupider.
Richard, and by the way, you have a whole chapter of the book talking about the press, journalists, and things like that. So is an area dominated by this level of how do you read this situation? How come we have such a majority of the press in
Right.
the Western society damaged that much?
Right. So, I mean, I discuss it both in the opening 4 chapters where they play an important role, and then I have a special chapter dedicated to what I call the lethal journalists who are running lethal narratives, accusing Israel of deliberately killing children and so on as news. And I mean, it's a combination of 3 factors. One is, and there's no question that there's an enormous amount of intimidation by the Palestinians of journalists who work here. And there are a fair number of people who have been kidnapped, and 2 Fox journalists were actually forced to convert to Islam, which means that there's a death penalty on them if they, don't take that seriously and so on. But I think at a certain point, you don't have to kidnap or threaten the journalists. They understand. And we saw it, interestingly enough, in 2014. Operation Tsuketan, I forget what the English was. But in any case, in 2014, there were a bunch of crews that were not socialized into complying with Palestinian media demands. An Indian crew, for example, from India, who saw and filmed Hamas building a rocket launch site right outside their hotel. And the rules are, if Hamas is shooting rockets from a civilian area, you don't cover that, because they want it to seem like the Israelis are just randomly bombing civilian areas. So they went through all sorts of, twists and turns as to whether they should publish this. And of course, they published it, but only after they had left. And so again, but the veterans of coverage in the Middle East, like the BBC and the New York Times and France 24 and so on, and CNN, they already knew what the rules were. They didn't run foul of the rules. So one element is this intimidation. The second element is what you could call a sort of ideological commitment, the post-colonial paradigm. Israel's the imperialist, colonialist presence, and the poor Palestinians are indigenes who are just fighting for their lives and for their freedom. Okay, let's say even 20% of journalists were convinced by what I certainly consider not only empirically false, but loopy reading of the situation. But okay. And then the third one is probably the most disturbing, and that is, I think that there's a really powerful emotional appeal to Westerners, and this includes Jews, of a kind of moral schadenfreude, sort of joy in the suffering of Israel when it's maligned in the press. In other words, when Israel is debased morally in the press with reports of killing civilians, of targeting kids, and so on and so forth, that somehow gives people a kind of charge. Nobody has a sort of secret thrill that Hamas is guilty of targeting children. They do it all the time. They're open about it. You go, titch, titch, this is not nice, and they leave it at that. But when Israel, it's like, when dog bites man, it's not a story. But when man bites dog, that's a story. And so I think that there's a way in which there's this sort of excitement and reassurance for some people, too many people, that they just love to hear news of Jews behaving badly. And I think that you see that right now in the sort of way in which, even before Israel invaded Gaza, people were already accusing her of genocide. So today in progressive circles, it's sort of like almost an axiom that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza, which, if you think about it, is an absurd statement. But it's an exciting statement. It's a statement that sticks it to Israel. And that's good, that people like that. Why they like it is another question. We don't have to go into it right now. But I think so that what the Palestinians, what Hamas in particular, has made a career of is making sure, engineering the suffering of their own people. 500 miles of tunnels in Gaza and not one public bomb shelter for civilians by a group that constantly provokes the Israelis to bomb them. So they engineer this suffering, and they count on the media to report that suffering with the implication that it's Israel's fault. And you get what I call outraged compassion. I feel, oh, these poor people are suffering so greatly. What is wrong with those Israelis? Why are they doing this? And they don't want an answer to that, because if they got an answer to that, they'd have to blame Hamas. They'd much rather blame Israel. Why are they doing it? Because they're nasty, because they're cruel. I always knew the Jews were cruel.
Yeah. And Rich, looking ahead, what could be a good scenario? Considering that you have a billion and a half Muslims, and
Right.
jihadists are a fraction of this huge number of people. Why don't they get their act together and clean this thing? Should the world be waiting for that, or should we have a big world religion war to fix this one once and for all?
Right. So first of all, I think that the important thing is to distinguish between Islam and what I call triumphalist religiosity. Now, triumphalist religiosity is a form of religious belief that needs for one's own religion to dominate visibly the public sphere. So as long as your religion is in charge, as long as others show it the respect that they feel it needs, and you don't have to show that respect to the others, as long as the situation is one in which your religion dominates, then you feel confident that your religion is the true religion. When your religion no longer dominates, you have two choices. Either you grow up and say, dominating is not exactly what monotheism is about. That would be nice. Or you double down and say, I must reestablish my dominance in order to reassure myself that my religion is the true one. And that, unfortunately, has been the decision. So it's not just a question of jihadis. Jihadis are the sort of tip of the spear, but the spear is much longer than that. There's a much broader, particularly in the Muslim majority world, of this where Islam has been dominant. There's a widespread adherence to this triumphalist version of Islam. And that's what gives you Dar al-Harb, Dar al-Islam, the realm of Islam, of submission to Sharia, and the realm of the sword, which is infidel-run countries, which should eventually, to paraphrase Freud, where there was Dar al-Harb, there shall be Dar al-Islam. So the real enemy is not Islam. The real enemy is this triumphalist need to dominate. And that is in the interest of every infidel in the world and every moderate Muslim to fight. Unfortunately, most people, even as they assume that Islam, even as they argue that Islam is, I believe Obama said 99.9% of Muslims reject this medieval vision of Islam. Even as they say that, they're afraid to confront this kind of triumphalism. And that's where the fight has to take place. Now, you can go after some of the obvious sort of locales of the jihadi presence, the Hezbollah to the north of Israel, Hamas to the south, the Houthis even further south, and of course the Iranians. And it is in the interest of every country in the world that is not Muslim and many Muslim countries to see these organizations defeated, to see the overthrow of the Iranian regime, which is immiserating its own people. But for some reason, and I call this own goal diplomacy, for some reason, Western countries pursue policies that are exactly the opposite, that are designed to preserve Hamas, to preserve Hezbollah, to deal with the Iranians rather than try and get rid of them. And I think that's again, along with the failure of the progressive left culturally, there's the failure of democracies politically to confront this.
It's also like a suicidal standing, because that's what's happening in Europe. Look at what happened in Amsterdam 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
It was not the local people, it's the immigrants that are making this mess, right? All over Europe.
Right. And in fact, I mean, one of the ironies of the 21st century is that the Muslims may succeed in doing what Christians failed for 1,000 years to do, which is to expel the Jews from Europe. I mean, I laugh, but it's not funny. It's tragedy. And the fact is that anybody who knows the history of democracy well will tell you that the dictators go after the Jews, that the people who go after the Jews are the warmongers, and they will go after the Jews by accusing them of exactly what they plan to do. The Nazis, through the protocols of the Elders of Zion, accused the Jews of wanting to enslave mankind, which was the Nazi program. Today, the jihadis accuse Israel of wanting to commit suicide, which is exactly the program that in Arabic they expound daily from the pulpits. At no point in the German genocide of the Jews were there priests and ministers standing at the pulpit of German churches and calling for the genocide of the Jews. And yet it's a common phenomenon in Palestinian TV, whether it's PA or Hamas. So, and this is not reported in the Western press. So you end up with people who think that it's Israel who's committing genocide, when in fact what they're doing is promoting the genocidal propaganda of their enemy.
Right. I will be flexible now in the remainder of the time. If anybody has any questions, I don't know, Kelita, if you have outside of the group here, but Raul raised the hand. So Raul, go on.
Yes, I have a question. Let me just a second.
And Raul was also with the hand raised. But you're on mute, Raul. Você está no mudo, você está no mudo.
Oh, yes, but Kelita May I go and with
Yeah,
my
go. You go, then
So
Elita goes.
thank you very much, Professor Landes. I have a question that disturbs me a lot when I discuss everything that you talk about with my friends. And there are some friends that say, yeah, but don't forget that Rabin was assassinated. So they
Right.
make a comparison between the jihadists and our, I don't know how to call them, but our kind of radicals and stuff like that.
Right. Right.
What is my best answer to them? Because it's very hard to answer them.
Right. So when they say, look, Rabin was assassinated, um, uh, listen, I mean, Rabin was the huge exception. It was viewed by the vast majority of Israelis as a terrible event. Um, when moderates are assassinated in Palestine, like the whole Nashashibi clan was eliminated by the Husseini clan, who in fact were responsible for driving the Palestinians into this irredentist total war on the Jews, they were proud of it. So I think it's two very different cultures. Um, Rabin was assassinated because during the Oslo process, there was this constant split between what the Arabs said, Arafat said in Arabic, and what he said in English, or, Lashon of Zara, foreign languages. And so he was openly in Arabic and in many of his actions pursuing war. And the Israelis were sort of stuck in a peace process that they couldn't pull out of, even though they said when they entered the peace process, if the Palestinians didn't show signs that they were willing to make the compromises necessary, they would pull out of it. So Israel was in an extremely difficult situation, and there was a kind of culture war going on within Israel, which continues to this day, in which, on the one hand, you had a bunch of people saying, if only we give more, then we'll get peace. And other people saying, the more you give, the more likely you are to get war. I happen to be of the latter variety. I wouldn't have been in favor of assassinating the leader, but I certainly wasn't happy with the way he was going. So when people invoke something like that, as if to say, look, both sides have their radical right wing and stuff, I think the important thing to point out is that in the Palestinian world and Palestinian political culture, the radical right wing is the norm. They get 98% of the vote. Nobody was, or, it wouldn't even be 0.5% of the vote who would have voted for Baruch Goldstein's party. So I think that it's really important to understand that Israel really is a democracy and a civil society. I was talking with somebody today who was saying, both sides need to change leadership. I said, look, if the hard part is the Palestinians changing leadership. If they change leadership, then, it'll just be a matter of another election before the Israelis change leadership. Israelis want peace. The Palestinian leadership does not. What do the Palestinian people want? It's hard. I mean, I got to say, if I were a Palestinian and I were constantly being pumped up with this lethal journalism, this war propaganda about how Israel is deliberately killing poor Palestinian babies, and with no self-criticism about the way Hamas behaves and so on, it would be hard for me to be a moderate. I can understand, particularly a young person. I can understand them. I don't approve it, but I can understand it. What I don't understand is why people in the West who claim to be progressive are on their side.
Kelita, you have a question.
Yes, I have a question. Thank you, Mario. Richard, so far we have talked about the distance between the Western thinking and the jihadism, and but I think we are not talking about the Eastern think. Do you think there is it's possible East and West to be together against a common enemy?
What do you mean by East? Do you mean the Arab world, the Middle East, or do you mean the Far East?
No, it's because we have we are talking about Occident and
Right.
Occidental thinking.
Right.
And I think when we talk about Occidental, we think also about Eastern thinking. And I don't know if jihadism it's inside or representative for the Eastern thinking.
Well, again, I ask, when you say Eastern, do you mean everything to the east of the West, or do you mean Middle Eastern?
I don't know. I would like to listen you about what is not Occidental thinking.
Right, right. So, I mean, I think that the key issue of difference between Western thinking and other thinking is that most cultures are based on what you could call, what I call a shame honor culture. And that's a culture in which what other people think of you is the most important thing. And all of your activities are designed to influence how people see you. And so as a result, among other things, it's legitimate to shed blood for the sake of honor. Whereas in the West, I think there's a significant development towards a kind of individual integrity in which what you do and what you know you do and who you are is more important in some cases than what other people think. So to give you an example, if you live in a shame honor culture and you have not done anything wrong, but people think you have, then you are devastated. You are devastated because you've lost honor in your peer group. And the fact that you didn't do it doesn't help at all. If you're in an integrity, what I call an integrity guilt culture, and you've not done something wrong, then even though other people may think that you did and disapprove of you, you don't feel bad about yourself. You might feel bad about your situation, but you don't feel bad about yourself, and vice versa. In a shame honor culture, if you've done something that's wrong and nobody knows, that's fine. You got away with it. If you are in a guilt integrity culture and you've done something that nobody else knows about that's wrong, you still feel guilty. So I think that that's a huge difference. And I honestly don't think that you can have a democracy, and certainly I don't think you can have a free press as long as shame honor is the dominant concern. For example, during the Dreyfus affair in France, there were over 25 journalists who had to fight duels because they wrote stuff that was true, but that insulted people. And, you know, in a shame honor culture, the truth can sometimes be even more infuriating than lies. And I think that is a huge difference. And I think that there are people who are in shame honor cultures who can look at an integrity guilt culture like a Western democracy and say, okay, I want to imitate what they're doing because that's my new peer group. And I think Japan is a good example of that. So you can have that. But jihad represents, if you will, the most regressive element of the shame honor dynamic.
Richard, we're getting close to the hour here. I wanted to, before we wrap up, first of all, to announce to the group here that we are building a course, a full course. So this is just a
taste,
a tasting of your future course that we hope it will be ready on the first quarter, beginning of the year.
Okay.
But if you could recommend in our academy here, we like very much to explore the continuation of the conversation. Of course, here it will happen because of the course. But what else would you recommend as
Reading material?
bibliography? And I know you have your podcasts. Tell us
Right.
about what people that are not the stupid Western
Right.
that you characterize should be reading.
So let me name some authors. I think Einat Wilf, Einatwilf, is really good. Shani Moore, Shanymor. Obviously, Douglas Murray, Richard Kemp. You know what I'd like to do is send you a list and you can publish it. One of the points I want to make that I didn't get around to making is in the title of my book, it says, "Can the whole world be wrong?" The whole world is in quotes. It's in scare quotes, and it's not the whole world. What it is a bunch of people who dominate the public sphere in the West, the journalists at CNN and BBC and the New York Times and so on, who think that what they think is what the whole world should and does think, and they speak in the name of the whole world. And what we saw in the last elections is even the American people don't take them seriously anymore. I mean, if you have an election in which a pretty erratic, bizarre, and undependable person with a very unattractive personality beats the Democrats, then you know the Democrats have failed on a massive scale to gain the trust of the American people. And I think that you know that the quotes in the whole world is important because in fact the whole world doesn't agree with these people, but they live in a bubble in which they speak for the whole world, and they are wrong.
Richard, fantastic. Kelita, I'm going to thank Richard, and then you give the final message here. So, Richard, I want to thank you very, very much for another marvelous hour of learning here. I recommend strongly for people to now wait for the Portuguese version of the book because it's coming very soon to our shores. But I want to thank you for your time, and I can't wait to see our course here beginning, and I hope we keep this connection with you, and have the opportunity also to listen to your further studies and developments in your study base. So, Kelita, please, your conclusion remarks as well.
Bom, então eu retorno agora para o português.
Well,
falando
now
com
I
nossa
will start speaking
audiência.
Portuguese again to address the public and thank Richard and Mario for this great conversation. It was very enlightening and it left some room for a lot of questions, but we will have this opportunity to go back and address these questions when Richard comes back with us in the course next year. And I'm looking forward also for the release of the book, the launch of the book in Portuguese, which is a very enlightening testimony of a context that is very hard to understand for those who are within the Western thinking, to try to switch the way you think, right? So anyway, this was just a little taste. It was just a little taste of what's to come in our course, this relation that we want to establish and we started establishing today. And all the content that the Jewish Academy has brought to you, those who have not had the opportunity to join our platform, you can here go and access all the archives of the Jewish Academy with more than 70 courses and 300 classes available, material in different kinds of formats, different approaches, methods, and content in forms of classes, interviews, and films. So I invite everyone to come and visit our platform and maybe consider the subscription and a membership who you can access through the QR code on the screen. Check our content and give us your feedback to say what you thought about it and what you would like us to include in our gallery. Now, we have been trying to bring relevant content to our audience and our community for things that make sense in our life. Our times is so short, right? So it's good to have a selection and curated content in one single place. This is what we have been trying to offer through the Jewish Academy in this streaming platform that is modern and easy to access. We invite you all and thank you all very much. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Mario. Thank you, everyone.